Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's Tireside Chat, Marque of the Machine. I'm Karen Mahoney, the Director of Development here at Savoy. Before we begin, I would like to go over a couple of housekeeping items. Our current exhibitions include the Mighty 300 Chrysler letter cars, and the winner is sun-kissed convertibles, Would You Believe It, and from stock car to race car. Our next exhibition will open on July 14th, Wartime Hero to Weekend Warrior, featuring one of America's favorite vehicles, the Jeep. On June 19th at 7 p.m., Movies at the Museum will show everyone's favorite, Talladega Nights, The Ballad of Ricky Bobby. I would like to introduce our host of our Tireside Chats, a man who has served as the executive director of the Peterson Automotive Museum, has authored 25 books and countless magazine articles, a respected automotive judge who has worked around the world, and he has curated 14 critically acclaimed automobile exhibitions that have appeared at major fine arts museums across the United States. And most importantly, he has been guest curator, automotive historian, and friend to the Savoy since before it opened. Ken Gross.
Oh. Thank you, Karen, very much, and good afternoon, everyone. We're very glad you figured out the little secret of today, which is that it's not Saturday night. So we're very, very glad you're here. I want to say a few words to introduce my friend Kurt Hall. Kurt has been interested in cars for a long time, and he and his dad restored a couple of 57 Chevrolets. They also went to the Smithsonian, where Kurt saw for the first time automotive badges, and made a deep impression on him. He's a fellow who really likes history, and he wanted to know more about the companies and more about the badges. So but before I kind of get into that a little bit, I want to tell you that Kurt spent 40 plus years as a senior executive with the Securities Exchange Commission with Ernst & Young, and he's still a very respected person in Washington circles in the financial area. So we met at our local Cars and Coffee on a Saturday morning. Kurt came up to me and we talked for a few minutes, and he said he had a collection of badges and he was thinking of writing a book. And Kurt is not the first person who's come up to me and said that they had a book idea, but it turns out he's the best prepared person who ever did it. Over the course of the conversation, he said, I want you to come to my house and see this badge collection. And I said, well, how many do you have? Thinking maybe he had 50 or 100. He said, well, closing in on 500 from all, and my badges are really just pre-1942 American cars, not European cars and so forth. So I was curious, so I went to the house, and sure enough, he had these fabulous display cases. He had written the history of every single badge. He'd written the damn book. The really question was how to help, and I was fortunate. I'm friends with Michael Furman, a wonderful photographer, and he came down, met with Kurt, saw the badge collection, and they have a new book which we had hoped to debut tonight, this afternoon, but Kurt's a perfectionist, Michael's a perfectionist, so it's going to be a few more weeks. But we will have you'll see the book cover up there. At the end of our session, we have a handout that shows the book and even an order form. So shameless plug for the book. And at this point, we're going to talk about badges. I think you'll find it, I hope you'll find it as interesting as I did. And I'm going to turn this off just so it doesn't interrupt us at a critical moment, which it has a way of doing. If I can. There we go. Okay. So let's begin. Marque of the Machine is the title of our little talk today, and you'll see we can't talk about the 5,000 makes of cars, some big, some small, in the United States. But we're going to cover a few of the more interesting ones and the badges that they wore. So, having my usual problem with the clicker here. Blake, can we do the next?
There we go.
Oh, there we go. Okay, great. So, I mentioned 5,000 manufacturers, staggering number. Some only built 1 or 2 cars, some built more, but there have been a huge number. It would have been daunting for many collectors, but not Kurt, who painstakingly began to buy these badges. And perhaps you can tell us how you did it.
Yep, so thank you, and thank you to Savoy for having me here. It's a great place to be. So this is an illustration of an exhibit that's at the Smithsonian Museum of American History. So if you go there, you go to the America on the Move exhibit, which is a profile of the development of transportation in the United States. There's this graph that uses automobile nameplates instead of the traditional bar graph that you see. So I went to this exhibit, I saw this, and I said, wow, this is a tremendous opportunity for me to blend my love of collecting, my love of American history, and my love of cars together all in one hobby. So I immediately went home, I went on to eBay, and I started looking for automobile badges, and of course, there's some readily available, and you know, some of them are not very expensive, so I started the hobby, and then I quickly realized that, wow, this could really overtake my budget and my wall space. So I had to figure out how to confine my collection to something that was more manageable. So I picked this era of up to 1942, which is when the American automobile production stopped in the United States because of World War II. And there's a wonderful book that's out there by Beverly Kimes called The Standard Catalog of American Automobiles from 1805 to 1942, which essentially has over 5,000 marques profiled in that book. So I tried to confine it to cars. I have a couple trucks nameplates in the collection because they're so outstanding in terms of design, but that's the inspiration behind the collection. So if you think about it, 5,000 marques, I have about 500 marques in the collection. I'm 10% there, okay?
So, there we go. So you'll recognize the locomobile from the Tellus, and this locomobile is really before manufacturers had badges to identify their cars. And Kurt will tell us a little bit about why this and how they evolved into these elegant little badges.
Okay, so if you think about the early vehicles and you look at this vehicle, it's essentially a carriage without a horse, right? This is the horseless carriage. There was usually a 1 or a 2-cylinder engine underneath the seat, and these cars were branded or identified the same way that most carriages were manufactured at that time, with a small little metal tag that was either mounted underneath the seat or on the cowl in front of the driver's seat. And that's the way cars were branded and identified, because there was no other really mechanism for or need to identify that. So this comes from a locomobile, which started out making steam-powered cars. They transitioned to gasoline in 1904. This was the first American car brand, or Marque, to win the Vanderbilt Cup, which it won in 1908. And the locomobiles were owned by the likes of the Vanderbilts and the Carnegies, so it was a very respectable and well-known and respected Marque in the time. Eventually, the company ended up being purchased by William Durant in the 1920s, who tried to remake the brand unsuccessfully. So this particular piece, I can identify at 1899, which I put on here, and I interestingly was looking for a picture to kind of pair with each one of these marques, and I found this one, and I looked, I'm like, Tellus, isn't that in Cartersville, Georgia? So this is actually a piece from 1899. I know it's from 1899 because the nameplate says Newton, Massachusetts, and they moved to Bridgeport in 1900. So this is an unused piece from that was produced for the manufacture of cars in Newtown, Massachusetts, that subsequently was not used. Somebody maybe in the shop took it, put it in their pocket, said, hey, I remember this company, and that's how a lot of these badges got saved. People either pry them off radiators in junkyards, took them off the manufacturing floor, or they were unused because the production ended before the nameplates were all used up.
So if you wanted to know about a car in this era, you had to get up close and personal to see it. And that began to change with this next
So this is the
slide
era
that
I
we're gonna
call
see.
big and bold, right? So, as engines got larger on cars, you couldn't put them under the seat at all. Cooling became an issue for automobiles. So the bonnet, the hood was created with a radiator in the front, and the radiator became the billboard for advertising the car. So in the early 1900s, they used these big brass scripts that they put on the radiator. So if the car was coming down the road, most of the cars looked exactly alike in that time frame. You could look at the radiator, see the name of the car, and you knew exactly what kind of car that was. So this one came from a 1908 Rio that showed up at Katie's a couple times. One of the interesting things about it, and is I read a contemporary article in about, I think from 1907, where people were complaining, why am I advertising for this particular company? And a lot of people took off the scripts off the front of the car, just like if you go to a car dealer today and you see the nameplate, the license plate frame, or the badge that's on the back, people say, hey, take that off, I'm not going to advertise for you. So they did the same thing. The Rio is an interesting car, interesting naming convention behind it. Ransom Eli Olds, the founder of Oldsmobile, his famous car was the Curved Dash Olds. He got into a disagreement with management of Oldsmobile about the production and ceasing production of the Curved Dash Olds. So he set out to form his own car company. He wanted to call it Olds. He was told he couldn't use that name, even though that was his last name, because he had signed away some of the licensing rights to the Oldsmobile brand. So he decided to name the car after himself in a different way, using the initials Ransom E. Olds, or Rio. Rio made cars until 1936. They made trucks until 1975. And yes, the question I always get, REO Speedwagon is named after this company. The lead singer saw an REO Speedwagon, which was a truck, said, hey, that's pretty cool, let's name our band after the truck. So here's a company that lends its name to a rock band.
So you'd think that after years of doing these things, I would master this clicker, but I'm slowly getting it. We're going to show you some of the more interesting badges that Kurt has collected, and the Pathfinder is a car most people have probably never heard of. The badge is very, very clever, and I think Kurt will tell us a little bit about why this is one of the first radiator badges of real substance.
So in about 1907, a company called the Cleveland Motor Car Company decided that, instead of people taking off the script off the radiator shell, they were going to take a practice that was used pretty widely in France and use enamel badges or enamel nameplates and decorate their cars. So they had an advertisement in the newspaper and said, look for our badge, described the badge, said it's an enamel, so when you see this car coming down the road, you see the badge, you'll know it's our car, right? So this one I really like. It's one of the favorites of my collection because it's quite unique, it's quite large. Many of the nameplates that you see on cars are round or oval. This one has a very unique shape that's very distinguishable as you see this car coming down the road. The Pathfinder was a car, it wasn't produced for very long, from like 1911 to 1917. This was one of the first cars that introduced a 12-cylinder engine in 1916. But like many, many companies of this age, this company didn't survive World War I. The demand for supplies and materials and shortages really caused havoc for the automobile industry at this time. And this is one of those companies that didn't survive the First World War and went out of business in 1917. Very, very stylistic and neat piece.
Blake, if you can hear me, I think you may need to, there we go. We're in business. So there's more to these badges than meets the eye. They look fairly simple, but they're actually pretty, pretty complicated. like this clicker. Kirk can tell us why.
So, these are actually miniature kind of works of art. So everybody thinks about today, if you go to your car, you'll see the nameplate on your car, plastic. These are what are enameled, right? So the way the companies approached jewelry manufacturers in this time frame, there was about 5 or 6 main manufacturers in that period. There was more than a dozen producers in total. But what the process was for making one of these is you'd come up with first a design. The design would be engraved into a piece of machine tool like this 1911 Everett. And the areas that are depressed are going to be the areas that are going to be the high areas in the nameplate. And they put a piece of copper alloy on this die, pressed it down. There was a stamping tool that cut out this diamond shape, and then each individual piece would require the application of enamel. So enamel is essentially ground up glass. They'll mix it with distilled water and paint by hand all the different colors in the respective spots on where they're supposed to be. So this was usually done by women, young girls, to paint the enamel in place. It would go into an oven. It would be kiln fired. It would come out. The gaps in between the glass would create gaps, and they would reapply the enamel, put it in the oven again, come out, grind the surface down, polish it, put whatever attachment device would go on. And if you think about this, it's an incredibly labor-intensive process. So this explains the reason why enameling and the use of enamel nameplates went out of fashion after the Second World War. But I read an article about one of the major manufacturers who said we were making 17,000 nameplates a day for car companies and other manufacturing entities. So think about the amount of people that were working to produce all these nameplates. It's just incredible. This die came from one of the Robbins Company die. There was an individual that I met writing the book that was able to acquire all the dies for the original cars from, and I was able to pick one of these up. So it's a great find.
So one of the most familiar nameplates you can see is the Ford Blue Oval. And Kurt will tell us that the Blue Oval part didn't happen as early as the Ford did, but the script is from Childe Harold Wills, who was one of Henry Ford's investors. Wills was a metallurgist. He was responsible for among other things, the molybdenum steel that made the Model A such a strong, flexible vehicle. And like many of the Ford investors, Henry Ford bought them all out, and Childe Harold Wills started his own company, Wills St. Clair. The symbol was the gray goose, and they built cars of great technical merit, overhead cam V8s, and of course that wonderful molybdenum steel. So Kurt will tell us a little bit about how the Ford badge evolved.
So the famous, I call it the famous Ford script, was again designed by Wills for letterhead and business cards. And again, it didn't appear with the big blue oval until the 1927 on the Model A, and it's still in use today, just like a Chevrolet emblem. So and Wills left, as Ken mentioned, he chose the gray goose. So it wasn't until I started working on this book that I'm like, okay, this is like one of those beautiful nameplates that's out there. It's got nice color in it, but what's the symbolism behind the gray goose? And his quotation was, he selected the gray goose because it was the wisest, freest traveler of the skies, and it symbolized freedom of movement and long-distance travel. So just a lot of interesting history behind all these different cars.
Now, here's a car, again, many people have probably never heard of. And if you look at the badge, it looks initially as though maybe that's a cloud over Atlanta, but it's actually a cotton ball, and Kurt will tell us the significance.
So when I was doing the research, I put in this distribution of where car companies came from, and in Georgia there was 23 different Marques in Georgia, and this was probably one of the most successful ones. The individual, George Hansen, who founded this company, worked in a cotton mill at one time in his life, chose the cotton boll because it was the symbol of the economy in this area. Interestingly enough, a decline. His business kind of went bankrupt in 1925 because of a boll weevil infestation. So it's ironic that he chose this symbol, and it also represented the
Cursed by
demise
his own
of the.
cotton ball,
Yeah.
so to speak.
So I mean, this is actually a wonderful executed piece. So
The next one we're looking at is Rickenbacker, and Eddie Rickenbacker, Fast Eddie, might be a more familiar name to you. He was a World War I ace. He was a race driver first, so he certainly knew something about going fast. He shot down 26 German planes and countless barrage balloons in World War I, and went on to found the Rickenbacker company, and this is actually one of the first concept cars with the copper plating. It's a Rickenbacker, and the engine was unique because it had a straight 8 with a flywheel at either end to smooth out the firing impulses. And the hat and ring, Kurt will tell you all about that.
So interestingly enough, he capitalized on his World War I fame in his automobile industry. So if you look at the insignia on the plane, that's the insignia for the 94th Aero Squadron, and it was called Hat in the Ring, which symbolized America entering the war, World War I. So putting our hat in the ring is an expression. So you'll see that's almost an exact copy of the nameplate that he used. He also capitalized on the symbolism on this Rickenbacker Super Sport. He used the pilot's wings in 6 and 8 cylinder versions, and you can see the hat in the ring underneath it. Interestingly, what I found in researching this car company is the introduction of four-wheel brakes was considered a dangerous proposition for motor cars.
They thought you
One of the
wouldn't
first
be able to
cars that
steer
introduced.
if you had brakes in the front wheels. So he overcame that, as did Kenworthy and Duesenberg and others. We could spend half an hour, we won't, on Eddie Rickenbacker, but during World War II, he was famously shot down. He wasn't a pilot, he was on a mission and survived in the ocean for many, many days. He went on to found Eastern Airlines, and he owned the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So an amazingly accomplished guy. Unfortunately, the Rickenbacker car only lasted until 1927. So here we have the Thomas Flyer, and again, if you're a car enthusiast, you know that in 1908, Thomas Car Company from Buffalo actually entered one of its cars in a race that went over 4 months, literally driving from across the country from New York up through Alaska, through Russia to Paris. And their symbol is on their radiator badge, as Kurt will tell us.
Okay, so incredible story, by the way. There's a few books on this. It actually inspired a Disney movie, I think. A great race. So this is probably one of the most brilliantly executed nameplates out there, right? So you can see it's a semicircle, so it's really got a lot of definition to it. The execution of this is kind of second to none. The complexity associated with making this piece is incredible. The colors, if you look at it really closely, you can see the route the Grace Race took drawn across the maps of the globe. So this was used starting in 1910 to capitalize on the success and worldwide fame of essentially winning this race. Company, interestingly enough, based in Buffalo, New York.
So the nice thing about that Thomas Flyer that you're looking at, that is the New York to Paris car. When its originality was verified by a man named George Schuster, who was one of the drivers. There were several drivers. He had performed some wells repairs during the course of the race, and he was able to look at the chassis and tell at the time Bill Harrah, yes, this is the car.
You can see it. It's at the National Automobile Museum.
Sorry?
It's at the National Automobile Museum in Reno.
And you can see it in Reno, and it's fabulous because it's so original. So here's a car most of us have never heard of. This is a Da Vinci, and that's James Scripps Booth in the picture. Mr. Booth was an artist, came from a wealthy family in Detroit. He decided after first attempt to build an interesting V8 powered two-wheeled outrigger supported automobile called the Buy Auto Go. He decided to build what he thought was the car of tomorrow with a somewhat underslung chassis. You can see the car is a little bit lower than his is, and it had a number of interesting innovations. I was amazed to see that because only one was built at a cost of $100,000, that somehow Kurt has the badge. So he can tell us a little more about the Da Vinci,
Yeah.
and how do you find a badge when they only made one car?
Yep, so you look very hard. So, like I said, initially you can find things on eBay, then the rarer ones become harder to find. So, I've been collecting for over 20 years, built a lot of relationships with people, and I knew a gentleman who wanted to sell his collection. He probably had the best collection of American nameplates in the world. He lived in London. I made a trip to London for work, just happened to add a couple extra days in to go see his collection and convince him to sell me 80 of his rarest, best pieces, which I was able to buy. So the interesting story is, I always had a hard time going through Heathrow Airport because they always made me unpack my carry-on luggage. So if you think about what I did, I had my carry-on suitcase, I had custom-made plexiglass where I had like 10 nameplates attached to each one, and so I had them stacked in like a battery, and I'm like, I'm going to be at the Heathrow for hours, and put my bag on the luggage rack, and no one asked me any questions. I picked it up and carried it home. So this is probably one of only 2, maybe 3. It costs a lot of money to make these nameplates, so when they made them, they were probably going to make just more than one. Obviously, James had the idea he was going to go into mass production. He never did. The $100,000 cost, by the way, is about $2 million in today's dollars. And some of his innovations were like remote hood release, idiot lights like check your oil, low adjustable pedals, etc. He tried to market this car to a number of car companies, and no one took him up, although Stutz made the safety Stutz, which created a litigation between Booth and Stutz that lasted for a number of years.
Electric cars, we all think that that's a fairly new phenomenon, but they really go back to the earliest days of the automobile. They were marketed in the beginning, certainly for women, because it was very difficult for a slight man, let's say, or a woman to crank start an automobile, and that's the only way that a car could be started. So here's one of the early electrics, which has a very interesting history.
So, I always ask this question, how many electric car companies were there in the United States before World War II? Right? So when I ask that question, how many car companies there were, most people say fewer than 100. So when I tell them there was over 300 electric car companies in the US before World War II, people are kind of astonished. So if you think about some of the earliest electric cars, Columbia launched a fleet of taxi cabs in New York in the late 1800s, early 1900s. That replaced the horse-drawn hack, right, that people would hail on the street. So electric cars have been around since the turn of the century. The American automobile industry was competing between various means of propulsion, electric, steam, and internal combustion engines. And electric cars appeal to urban users and women because, hand cranking a car took a lot of energy and created some deaths, right? The founder of Carter Car Company died of gangrene when his arm was broken, which caused his friend Leland to invent the self-starter in 1912.
And Charles Kettering, who had come from National Cash Register and knew that a powerful electric motor to move a cash drawer full of heavy cash might start an automobile, and sure enough it did. I would just say one more thing about this. When you look at pictures of these early electric cars, Bakers and so forth, if you see them photographed in the period in their garages, many of them were purchased with a charger. You couldn't just plug this thing in your house. So the charger stood about 5 or 6 feet high. It had knife switches that looked like you'd have at the local prison for the electric chair. It's a really formidable device. But the cars themselves, with a 40 to 60 to 70 mile range, were quiet and perfect for the time.
Yep.
So here's the Stanley, and when people think of steam cars, everybody's heard of the Stanley steamer, but Stanley was not the only car company to build steam-powered cars. And think about the era in the 1910s, 20s, and so forth. Yachts, ships, trains were all steam-powered. So it seemed like the way to go. I like to think that because it took until the Doble steam car, it could take 20 minutes, half an hour to light up the boiler and get it up to steam and so forth. But if you owned horses in that era, you went out to the barn, you made sure your horses were fed, you had to put the harnesses on them, you had to hitch them up to a wagon. So people were not used to jumping in a car and taking off. The Stanley is close to me because they were made in Springfield, Massachusetts, near where I grew up, and they have an interesting story.
So again, I asked about electric cars. Over 450 steam car companies in the United States before World War II. 450. So obviously Stanley and Doble are the most famous, but I've mentioned Locomobile started as a steam. Steam-powered cars really kind of started to wane in terms of popularity at the invention of the self-starter. Internal combustion engines became a lot more reliable, so they kind of faded into obscurity. This nameplate I really love. I mean, and interesting, when Ken and I were talking about this, he's like, why do so many of the nameplates that you have feature horses in it, right? And horses and buggies. So this is one where, it's projecting the power that you would have had. To think about this, this has, look, 4 horses on it. Can you imagine how fast a small little chariot would have gone with 4 horses in it? And the symbolism on the sides, the oak leaves and the laurel are signs of victory. So very interesting nameplate on a very successful car.
The Stanley brothers, by the way, if you ever see their picture, they look like, I'm dating myself, the Smith brothers on the cough drops years ago. They both were identical twins with long beards, and they actually went into the photographic business after the Stanley steam car failed. So they were successful in numerous ways, and they were very, very clever. And speaking again of comparisons to today's cars, again, the Prius is a successful hybrid, but the idea goes back well over 100 years with a car like the Woods dual power.
So interestingly enough, Ferdinand Porsche, I think, is credited with the first hybrid car back in the really early 1900s. I bought this nameplate from a collector in Wisconsin who didn't know what it was, and I bought it, and I had no idea what it was because it doesn't have the name of the company on it, which is interesting. It just says gasoline and electricity. So I thought it might have been on a bus, it might have been on a generator or something like that. And years and years in research afterwards, I found out because I went to the Lauman Car Museum in the Netherlands, which has one of these, and it's a Woods dual power. So it had a gasoline motor, 14 horsepower gas motor, and it had a 5 to 6 horsepower electric motor. And inside you can turn a switch and decide whether you want electric or you want gas. The electric motor produced a speed of 15 miles an hour, and the gas motor produced a speed of 35 miles an hour. So those, the complications of the system that it took to drive it, and the fact that it could only go 35 miles an hour at a time where by 1918 cars were going well over 60 miles an hour. The company wasn't successful and ultimately went out of business in 1918. So very rare cars. Didn't the Peterson have one of these?
Peterson did. Ours was not restored, but we were always fascinated with the idea. Ours was in 1917, and again, over 100 years ago. When you do study the history of the automobile, you find out that darn near every idea was tried, but they didn't often have the technology or the infrastructure to make it work. And again, to Kurt's point a few minutes ago, here we're trying to get away from the horse-drawn carriage era, but there's horses on this nameplate.
Yeah, and what's fabulous about this piece is the number of colors. So there's 5 colors on this piece. So remember, these all had to be hand-painted onto the nameplate. So the person driving the chariot's in lavender, his cape is in red, the horse is in white, the harnesses are black, and then the decorative area around the side in blue. Just a fabulous, really fabulous piece, extremely rare.
This is a car, again, that has probably many cars in this era had a slogan, and I've always liked this one, a little higher in price, but made in Dixie. Now there's a good reason to buy a car. The Anderson was made in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and it was also distinguished because they sold a touring car body with like an extra rear end to the body itself, so you could convert the car from a 4-passenger Phaeton to a 2-passenger Roadster. And the badge itself, as Kurt will explain, is pretty complicated.
Yeah. So South Carolina, 12 car companies before World War II. We put Anderson up here because that was probably it operated the longest and was probably one of the most successful Southern automobile manufacturers. Lasted almost 10 years. Produced buggies and wagons, just like many companies who entered the automobile industry. Figured, okay, if we're going to produce buggies and wagons, and we have this thing called a car, we're going to be out of business. Ken keeps trying to get me to go to the Telus Museum to talk about the businesses that were put out of business from the cell phone, industry. This is the same thing. This is why there were so many car companies in America before World War II. What's interesting about Anderson was, they used very brilliant colors in designing their cars. This is the only one I could find. It's not really brilliant, but it's a yellow car, which is kind of unusual in at that time frame. But I want to kind of make note of this nameplate. You'll notice that there's this pattern underneath it, right? So one of the great things about how these nameplates were created was all these patterns were hand engraved onto the die, and then they used this translucent red enamel, which took a lot of work to put on, that you could see actually through the color to the background and the design, which is like a basket weave pattern on this. Very attractive. I'm still doing research to figure out the Rams smashing heads together. I'll let you know when I figure that out. But just a great slogan right on the car on, how do you differentiate a car? Come buy our car. A lot of car companies, every state except for Hawaii made at least one car, which is kind of amazing. And, if you think about why, if you're in some far-flung markets where you don't have really access to cars that were made in Detroit or New England, people said, we can make our own car here. It'll stand up for our city and our town. And that's how a lot of these car companies were created and why they didn't last very long.
Now, Dodge Brothers, Dodge in itself is a name you're all familiar with, but John and Horace Dodge were, again, part of this group of investors in Henry Ford's company, and when Henry Ford bought everyone out, John and Horace Dodge started their own car company.
Yep, so there's a lot of, when people look at this nameplate, what is the first thing they say? Most people say, oh, that's the Star of David, right? Because that's what it kind of looks like. And a lot of people kind of have association with that for Henry Ford, given some of his anti-Semitic comments that he'd made over the years. It's probably not what this is, right? So there's no kind of resolution, just like there's still a lot of debate on where the Chevrolet badge came, whether it came from a wallpaper or not. The prevailing theory on the Dodge brothers is the symbol or the Greek letter for D, Dodge, is the triangle, right? Delta, right? So the interlocking delta, the interlocking D's kind of represents the relationship that John and Horace Dodge had to get together in forming, a car company that's still around, one of the few that's still around today.
Duesenberg needs no explanation, and we had a wonderful Duesenberg exhibit not long ago. They were probably America's premier engineered luxury car, and they were successful on the racetrack, and they did something no other car manufacturer did with their nameplates.
So Duesenberg tried cars twice, I say. First, in 1920, they introduced the Model A. So the Model A used this Duesenberg straight 8 symbol on its radiator. The Model A wasn't incredibly successful. E.L. Cord came to them in the late 20s and said, hey, make the most fabulous car in the world. They did. They made the Duesenberg Model J. So the eagle on the bottom was the nameplate that was on the radiator, and they took their old Model A symbol and put it on a background here, a silver background, and that was the cowl, was on the cowl. So you lift up the hood on a Duesenberg, and the first thing you see is this big, bright gold eagle. Interestingly enough, as I think everybody kind of knows this, the Model J was kind of like the pinnacle in American automobile manufacturing. 265 horsepower base engine when a Model A was 40. They made a few that had superchargers that went 325, and then they made two of these cars, that's one of them, that had 400 horsepower. So think about it, 400 horsepower in 1928 was just kind of like phenomenal. I mean, today, even 400 horsepower is a lot for a car today. This was 1928.
So this is a short chassis, what Duesenberg called an SSJ, on a shorter wheelbase than the 142 and a half basic wheelbase. And this car, the actual car you're seeing here, sold for in excess of $20 million at a Gooding auction a couple of years ago to John Mozart. It was used by Gary Cooper, and an identical twin was used by Clark Gable. We don't think they ever owned them, but they were used for publicity purposes. And John Mozart, who happens to be a friend, bid, he wasn't at Pebble Beach. There's a video of him that his son took, bidding in increments of $1 million for this car. He's sitting at his kitchen table in a t-shirt. He has a fabulous collection in California, but Duesenberg is not only the pinnacle of American cars, it represents the most expensive price anyone's ever paid for an American car.
So now I think everybody's getting a sense of why I love collecting these nameplates, right? Because I would have never learned all the history associated with each one of these car companies by just doing random research.
Well, and I think you should tell about the three Graham brothers.
So three Graham brothers, famous for trucks, right? So they made truck conversion kits for Model Ts and Model TTs. That's how they got their start. In 1927, they purchased a declining car company called Page Detroit. Manufactured cars. They were very pioneers in using superchargers in their cars. Probably their two most famous models were the Blue Streak and the Shark Nose.
Right. We have a Shark Nose in the collection here.
Right. So this is one of the companies that didn't survive World War II. Interestingly enough, if you look at their nameplate, why you three mythical or characters in armor representing the three Graham brothers. Interestingly enough, after World War II, they decided, nope, car industry wasn't for us. We're going to go into a different field, and they started this company called the Madison Square Garden Corporation.
So Graham Page lives on today in Madison Square Garden. And here's a Romer, which was one of just a couple of American luxury cars who used a Rolls-Royce style radiator to make sure you knew this was an expensive luxury car. They also used a Duesenberg engine, and Kurt will explain.
Yep. So this one was referred to as the cheap Rolls-Royce, although it was a luxury car by American car standards, owned by, again, I think a lot of these car companies tried to get association with famous actors at the time. This is a car that was owned by, not this car, but this type of car was owned by Buster Keaton. This car set, Marque set multiple speed records in Daytona, very fast, using the walking beam Duesenberg engine. The story on this nameplate is kind of funny. I started going to the Hershey swap meet with my father at a very young age. And we continue to do so as a father and son thing after I graduated from college and started my professional career. And we were walking around and we saw this dealer selling radiators, actually whole radiators, and he had a Romer radiator. It was kind of a little bumped up and banged up, probably too banged up to be used in a car for restoration. So I went and asked him how much he wanted for it. He wanted too much, so kind of walked away. And then as we were walking back to our car at the end of the day, my dad goes, "Why don't you go try again?" So I did, and I gave him a really low offer, and he said, "Yep, I'll take it." So now I had this dilemma of I had a radiator that weighed about 80 pounds, okay, and our car was about 1.5 miles away. So I carried this thing for 1.5 miles. I thought I was going to die, and it was hot at Hershey too. I took the radiator core out, which was copper, sold it to a scrap dealer when copper was an all-time price, recovered my purchase price on the thing, and I had my father make a shadow box where I now display some of my car nameplates. It makes for a really neat, interesting display.
Here's a Veely, another name you probably have never heard of, and Kurt demonstrated for me today the brilliance of the internet, because we both wondered why this woman was holding what looked like two connecting rods, but there's no crankshaft. Veely was not in business for a long time, but 9 or 10 years. And what did the internet tell us about the crankshaft?
Yeah. So interesting. So Veely, Moline, Illinois, the financing come from the daughter of John Deere. So when these cars were first made, they were sold through John Deere farm equipment implement dealers. The car competed, not this car, of course, but Veely competed in the inaugural Indy 500 in 1911, finished 17th out of 46th. And then, the company went out of business in 1928, and its production line went back to John Deere. Now, what's interesting about this is I was trying to tell Ken, I said, look, the first time I started working at the Securities and Exchange Commission, we had this new thing came out called the internet, which was like the greatest thing for a researcher like me because I didn't have to go to the library anymore. I could just look things up. Ironically, I'm back at the SEC, and the new technology is called artificial intelligence, AI. So Ken and I were sitting and going through the program this morning. He goes, what do you think this woman's holding? And I thought it was a connecting rod, just like he did. So what I did is I took this picture and I dropped it in ChatGPT and Gemini, and I said, what is this? Chat gave me the answer that it was a connecting rod, which was wrong. And Gemini gave me the answer and says, it's a suspension system. So I said, give me some more information on this suspension system. It said, it's a Hassler friction rotation shock absorber. I'm like, okay. I said, show me a picture of one so I can compare it to the actual picture. And it pulled up and it said, well, there's no real pictures available, but here's a drawing of one. And I looked at it, and it is almost exactly like this. So we think that this is a shock absorber that was used on the car, and that this is a promotional demo to show that how smoothly riding the car was. Interestingly enough, if you're really interested, you'll see that I used AI to color this car and color this image. So you can do that in a second, put a black and white in, and bang, it's colored.
Another unusual make is the DeVoe. Norman DeVoe was a pillar in the car industry. He worked for several companies. What I liked about this badge, and I'd never noticed it before looking at it today, it actually spells out DeVoe, D-E-V-A-U-X, on what looks like a geometric pattern.
Yep. So again, interesting time to get into the automobile industry, right? Right in the heart of the Depression. So this company didn't last very long. Produced cars in Grand Rapids and Oakland, California. Was eventually bought out by Continental, who made motors for cars. Again, didn't last very long. Very kind of streamlined design associated with the cars.
When we had our Speedster exhibit, an American underslung, novel idea in that period to put the springs above the chassis and make the car extremely low, but with high tires, and a really fabulous badge.
Yeah, so at least 5 companies called American Motors, right? Not including the Gremlin AMX American Motors. Yeah. So this is a car that was marketed as a car for the discriminating few, and the reason is it cost $4,000 to buy in 1911 when the average worker was making $25 a week. Actually a beautiful car, probably one of the most highly collectible brass era cars out there because of its low-slung design, sporty look.
Here's one that, again, most people have never heard of, the Matheson Silent 6. That elegant presentation there is the Oriental carpeting in the Nethercutt Museum in Sylmar, California, if you ever go. And let's hear a little about the Matheson.
Made in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and it used overhead cams and hemispherical cylinders, so could be considered one of the first Hemis made. Set the world speed record for a mile in 1906 at 50 seconds, so less than a mile a minute. Ultra high-end luxury car. I mean, very, very expensive car at the time. People like William Randolph Hearst owned a Matheson. They only made about 1,800 cars in the 9 years or so of existence. What I love about this nameplate, it's probably the only one that's out there, is look at all the little squares on that nameplate that required someone to apply enamel in each one of those to get a pattern out. I mean, it's just a fabulously executed piece. Very, very, again, very rare mark.
We've been looking at this picture now for a day or so, and I just realized Kermit the Frog is clinging to the radiator cap.
I tried to find a picture without Kermit, but yeah, that's right.
I don't think Kermit goes back to 1912. And here's a McFarlane, another big, expensive luxury car from the 1920s, owned by Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. He was one of the stars that bought the car, and you'll be surprised to know who one of the other owners was.
Yeah. So McFarlane, made in Connorsville, Indiana, competed in the Indy 500. Their engine design was very unique. They called them the twin valve 6, which essentially had 4 valves per cylinder, not 2, and then used 3 spark plugs per cylinder. Extremely fast cars. Ultra luxury. Besides Fatty Arbuckle, Jack Dempsey owned one, and Al Capone bought one for his wife. He loved it so much he bought one for himself. Known as the American Rolls-Royce, just because of its cost. In 1923, a gold-plated version instead of the nickel plating on the metalwork, sold for $25,000 in 1923, which is equivalent of over $500,000 today. I was telling Ken, one of these came up for auction at the Stan Lucas. I really wanted to have it, but I didn't.
Here is a Birmingham, and this car is unique in a couple of ways. It has what's known as a California top, a lift-off top, and I think the sides are Fabricoid, it's called,
Yep.
A DuPont product. I mean, car makers in the early days did everything they could to differentiate their car in a positive way, but we don't think more than 50 Birminghams were made. So, Kurt, how do you find a Birmingham badge?
Yeah, well, I got this one my trip to London. Again, this one was probably never used, fabulously executed. Research tells me this is the coat of arms for Birmingham, England, of all places. The car was made in Jamestown, New York. Interesting, particularly for me being a securities person, this company was implicated in kind of mail fraud, stock fraud, when they had made just a handful of cars. They had a stockholder meeting where someone was actually stabbed to death, and one of the executives dove out the window to escape the angry crowd. They made a few more vehicles to substantiate that they were really a viable company, but it's estimated that fewer than 50 of the Birminghams were made. This car, pictured here, is a Birmingham with the first Miss America in it. The way and Ken mentioned the Fabricoid fabric body panels instead of metal and wood, meant to simulate an alligator skin. The interesting story on how this was marketed is like the car with the smoothest ride. They would set up 6x6 logs across the road. The demonstrator would light a cigarette, drive across these 6x6 logs, come out, flick the ash off his cigarette. So again, extremely rare badge, very colorful, wonderful story behind it.
So this is Kurt's new book, which will be coming out shortly, as we mentioned, and at the end of our presentation, if you're interested, we do have a little handout for it. It's one of those things where it all started with a conversation at Katie's Cars and Coffee.
Yep, so, one of the great things about this is when I talked to Ken, I said, Ken, I spent all this time condensing over 3,000 pages of research that I did into a 300 and some page book, which is very difficult to do. And I said, I really want to make this book special. Who can you point me in the right direction? He put me in touch with Michael Furman, who's a very well-known automobile photography And I was a little bit skeptical at first, of Michael. He's very artistic, very, very talented. But as we worked through this project together and he photographed some of these nameplates, it took on a whole different dimension for me and focusing on things that I'd really never focused on before, and that is the artistic design and design elements associated with it. So these are some of the photos that'll be in the book. If you back up one to the lion for one second, this one is three-dimensional. One lion car exists. It's in the Adrian Car Museum in Adrian, Michigan. Fabulous design, three-dimensional, extremely costly to make, but beautiful. If you flip the slide, the next one, you get into the allegory associated with some of these nameplates. So using mythical symbols to kind of associate with the car. So here you have beauty represented by Venus, Mercury for speed, and Atlas for strength. And this nameplate you get association with this car that says, okay, it's fast, it's beautiful, and it's strong. A lot of these nameplates are extremely beautiful. Holley Motor Company, everybody I think knows Holley in the sense of carburetors, but they did make cars in Bradford, Pennsylvania in probably till like 1904. And then the guy said, look, the car business is too stressful, too complicated. I am just going to supply carburetors to Henry Ford and some of these other car dealers. And as everybody knows, Holley still exists today. But again, look at that nameplate and the design and execution of it, very festive. And then the Diana, which is one of the most, people think most attractive badge, actually looks like a cameo that you'd see in jewelry. Just another fabulous piece. And then, again, if you look at the detail, most of these nameplates are about 3 inches across, okay? And when Michael starts taking pictures of these and blowing them up into a size like this, you can see the fineness of the execution of how these things were made, down to the fineness of the reins on the horses, and how these nameplates were made. Just fabulous. The use of different plating materials. Again, most cars were plated in nickel. Chrome didn't become a thing until the late 20s, but certain high-end cars use gold wash to kind of discriminate and illustrate their brand, like this Moon motor car company. So it's been a fabulous. This is not Apple, your phone, but Apple actually made car tops, and they decided they were going to make their own car. I think the badge looks more like a tomato than an apple, but it's very interesting if you look at the stylized script. Again, detail that I would never focus on looking at a 3-inch badge, but this book will kind of illustrate it. This is a part of the collection that I have that Ken came over and looked at and kind of said, "Oh wow, this is kind of."
I was convinced right away.
So thank you for joining us, and there's most of the collection that I kind of used and took pictures to put together. So think about this for a second. This is about 500 nameplates. I'm 10% of the way there. Can you imagine what the full collection would look like?
So we have time for a few questions, and I hope this has been productive in terms of everyone learning a few facts they didn't know about cars. And I think Karen has a microphone if we have any questions. Yep. Oh, could be a ringer here.
Okay, thank you.
So, and this is tough. What is your favorite badge in your collection?
It's like asking me which one of my 4 sons is my favorite. I love them all. Depending on my mood, I think the lion holds a really special place into it because it's very rare, very unique, and it's also the one I paid the most money for. But it depends. I love nameplates from my local hometown of Reading, Pennsylvania, which made about a dozen cars. Ben-Hur, different names. Paul, the Revere. If you look at this, it's so fabulous, the different variety and colors that went into producing these. So I really don't have a favorite. I love them all.
So how many are you able to add to your collection every year? By the way, great presentation. Fabulous.
Thank you. Well, right now I am not adding any because I can't find any new ones that I really don't have, right? So again, in order to keep my wife happy, I decided I was going to constrain myself to one per marque. I have a couple for like Moon though, because they were so cool and designs, and hardly any trucks and no foreign nameplates. So when you have over 500 nameplates, and if you want to get enamel ones like these, they're really, really hard to come by. So the other day a package came in the mail and I opened it up and there was 2 nameplates in there. My wife goes, "I thought you stopped buying those." I'm like, these were ones I sent out for restoration 4 years ago that came back. So I haven't added to my collection probably in over a year. But if you have something and you and you think it's going to be interesting, I'll give you my email.
Okay, sir.
Well, thank you. I say this is the first time I've enjoyed being badgered. I was going to ask about any particular designers or artists that were prominent in producing these. I know Nicola Bulgari has done design work for Cadillac instrument panels and so forth. Do you talk about any of the particular design people who did these?
Yep. So my collaborator, Michael Furman, that was the first question he asked me, right? So the answer is I only know of designer for one nameplate, believe it or not. So, but he set me off into this whole new area of exploration that I intend to pursue a lot further. We enlisted a design a person, Stephen Heller, to write the introduction for the book, who looked at this and studied graphic and company logos and designs. This is still an undeveloped field that we want to explore. The only one that I know of it was the Windsor. The Windsor used the coat of arms of the Prince of Wales, and they marketed it as the White Prince, and they used the words Buckingham Palace in their advertising. And the Crown complained, threatened to sue, so they changed their design. And one of the designers, I think his last name was Court, made up this design, which is on there somewhere. He's the only one that I know is specifically by name who designed some of these. But again, a lot of them are based on some element associated with the car. So you'll notice a lot of knights up there. So the Knight was a sleeveless engine, as many of you know. So there's Knight associations. There's animal associations, mostly wings and birds to constitute flight, speed, and freedom, right? Arrows for speed and direction. So lots of different themes. And one of the things that we did in the book was we kind of sorted these nameplates by kind of categories. And one of the biggest challenges is how do you sort about 400 different nameplates into categories, and you do that by sorting it into animals, shields, shapes, and alike. But that requires much more research.
Well, I was thinking about mentioning too about the time my brother bought a car for his work, his business. It was one of the Chrysler K cars. And I'm still not sure whether it was a Plodge or a Dimmoth, because the first time he washed it, he realized that it had Dodge logos on one side and Plymouth on the other.
Yeah. Interesting.
Question.
The one that you showed that was related to cotton, you said the boll weevil. Well, I lived in Enterprise, Alabama when I was youth pastoring and coaching and teaching at one point in time. And in the center of town, there's a statue, largest statue dedicated to an insect, and it's the boll weevil. And I thought, that's a crazy thing, man. You know, is there any nameplates that are just, man, that's a stretch. They're so unique. You're thinking, how did that make it? Like, I think it's interesting that one is made from cotton. But is there any unique stories like how in the world did they come up with that idea? And just a unique story about one that
Yeah,
probably
okay.
shouldn't have been, but it
I'm
was.
looking on here, and the one
You've
that
opened
popped.
Pandora's box.
Yeah,
You know,
the
you do
one
know
the one that pops out to me is the pan down here. Okay, so the guy's name was Pandolfo, but if you look at the nameplate, it's a pan, literally a pan with a car on top, over top of a globe, down here on the lower left-hand side. Very interesting. Like, okay, a pan, really, for a car? What's interesting about that one, again, stock fraud. Made a lot of cars, transported them from lot to lot to make it look like they had a lot more cars than they really had. So a lot of interesting stories associated with that. Again, so many different types of things. The Texas Star, cars from Texas. Again, association with the locality is generally the association, but nothing really like totally bizarre. The leech, which Ken and I were talking about, is the bear in the middle next to the Ben-Hur. Again, the bear is the state symbol of the state of California. The cars were made in Los Angeles. So there's usually an association somehow with either the founder, the company, the jurisdiction, or something associated with the car itself.
Question on the book cover. I thought at the top it said volume 3. Is it actually a multi-volume book then? Or?
Oh.
No. You want to tell the story? Go ahead.
Michael has done books on mascots, 2 volumes, and it seemed as though Kurt's book would make a terrific volume 3. And obviously, Michael would be happy to sell you volume 1 or volume 2, but the rule is you've got to buy Kurt's book first.
Yeah. So when I was thinking of a name for the book, right, I came up with automotive jewelry, right? And I went and I looked and did some research to see whether that title was available, and those were the titles for Michael Furman's books, automotive jewelry. So the cover says automotive jewelry, volume 3, but it's Marque of the Machine that talks about nameplates, because this will be the first book on automobile nameplates, believe it or not. There's many, many dozens of books on mascots or hood ornaments, but there's no books on nameplates. So this will be the first one. It profiles everything from, how they were used, how they were made, how they were attached to cars, restoration clues and tips, how to spot fakes, reproductions. It serves a dual purpose. It serves as kind of a collector's guide for those who are interested in collecting, those who are interested in how they were made, and then there's the design element and the artistic element that showcase where Michael does a fabulous job at showcasing the design attributes and beauty of some of these pieces.
So Kurt has his book, and I got a chance to look at it on the way down on a laptop, and I spent pretty much the whole flight going through. As he just said, he's divided these into really interesting categories, automotive histories. I can't really say I know anyone who has taken a segment of the automotive hobby and done such a deep dive. So you'll get a kick out of this. I think we were over at the booth today, and Kurt knows quite a bit about American presidents. So I wanted to show him the gallery there that has a signed letter or document from every American president. And he said, I've just started getting interested in this, and I have a number of presidential autographs. So God knows where that's going to go.
Yeah, and there were, just interestingly enough, there was 8 cars named after U.S. presidents. So Washington, Madison, Jackson, Cleveland,
Lincoln.
Roosevelt,
Right.
Grant. Yep, great hobby.
Hi, I'm just curious, are there any badge or badges that are out there that you might be familiar with that you'd love to have but probably will never have them because they're too insanely expensive? And if so, what might they be?
Well, cost isn't really the issue. It's getting someone to loosen their hands from it. Yes, unfortunately, there's a lot that I'd like to have out there that I can't have. So believe it or not, there's a hobbyist group out there. It's pretty small. If you go onto Facebook, there's actually a couple user groups on nameplates and badges. I have when I bought the 80 nameplates in London, the guy wanted to sell me 2,500. I was just ready to go into retirement, and I'm like, ugh, my wife's going to kill me if I spend all this money. So I picked the 80 best. A friend of mine bought the rest of them. He has a lot of the pieces that I should have bought and didn't, like the Chevrolet Copper Cooled, which is a great story behind it. Only a few dozen of those cars were made. Most of them were destroyed by Chevrolet in their attempt to make an air-cooled car. But yeah, there's lots out there that I'd really like to have, but I don't have. You just look and smile and salivate a little and look again. When I started this collection, I met a gentleman in Minnesota whose family ran junkyards from 1915, right? And he told me at the time, and it holds true today, you're never going to have them all, so don't even think about it.
The gentleman who mentioned the boll weevil statue in, I think, Alabama, and what kind of odd nameplates you might have up there, kind of made me think of, so if anybody's been to the the Carlsberg Brewery in Copenhagen, they have some statues of elephants at the entry there, and the elephant statues have a swastika on them, and they're careful to note that this predates Hitler's use, his National Socialist Party's use of the swastika. And I noticed there's a blue one up on the left there that has a swastika on it, so I presume that car company predated the National Socialist Party's use of the swastika.
Yeah.
There's some kind of story behind that.
Yep. So the Crittenden Motor Company, I think operated from like 1913 to 1915 in Detroit. So the Crook Cross kind of dates back over 3,000 years. It's used in many cultures around the world. If anybody ever actually travels to places like Japan, the symbol for a Buddhist temple is the Crook Cross. It's been used in civilizations like ancient India. Some of the early American civilizations, like the Aztecs, used the same symbol. Back in the time period when this was used in America, it's actually fairly widely used. I did a lot of trademark analysis part of this book. It's considered a good luck symbol, right? So the Crook Cross was considered a good luck symbol, so it was chosen to represent luck. Interestingly enough, for this car company, that luck actually doomed its kind of fate, and there's not many crits out there left because during World War II, obviously, its association with the symbol with the National Socialist Party in Germany. Many of these were stripped from the cars, and the cars were destroyed. The one I had, I found for somebody who dug it up. Didn't have any of its enamel, and I had it restored because it's such a rare piece to have and very highly collectible.
Any idea where the name Crook Cross comes from?
Crooked cross. It's shape.
Okay.
The shape.
I thought you were saying
Crooked
okay,
cross.
thanks.
Does anyone have another question?
Great, well, we thank you very much for your attention. We do have
One
the
more.
handout. Oh, one
Actually,
more,
there
sorry.
might be two more.
Even so.
I know that this is your expertise, but it seems like since World War II, there can't be anywhere near 5,000 car companies in the U.S. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong.
I couldn't hear him.
Yeah, so I think the question was, after World War II, how many car companies kind of survived? The answer is not many. I think it was probably less than 3 dozen car companies. Some were new to the field, like Kaiser Fraser, Kaiser building, Liberty ships. They bought Graham Page, right? So they went into the car business. Some of the long-standing companies managed to survive. Studebaker, Packard, the GM, all the GM marques kind of survived, but it became very difficult to operate. Many of the factories were set up and tooled to make tanks and engines for airplanes and airplanes themselves. And when their contracts dried up, the manufacturer had to decide what to do with their space and retool. And the cost to convert from military production to automobile production was such that many car companies didn't really survive.
But you did have people who tried, like Preston Tucker.
Playboy.
The Playboy from North Tonawanda, New York, near Buffalo. So there were a few companies. There's a wonderful book called Last Onslaught on Detroit by Dick Langworth. It's just about that immediate post-war era and the people who thought they'd take one more swing at Detroit. And if anybody had a chance, I'll say really quickly, it might have been Henry Kaiser, who built the Hoover Dam and who's built Liberty ships like in a week. They could have a sailing ship. But he was also unable to do it. But he gave a famous speech at the Detroit Athletic Club where he got up and before an audience of automotive executives and said that he was going to devote in 1946 $100 million to building a car company. And reportedly a voice in the back said, "Give the man one chip." So that's how expensive it would be to do it.
Yeah.
One other question along kind of the same line. During this time frame, the rest of the world, how many car companies
Ooh.
were they anywhere near
Present
this
day?
big?
Yeah, no, how many global car companies were there? I have no idea. I would multiply the 5,000 probably by like 7 or 8, right? Because if you think about it, there was equally as many car companies in France and Germany and Italy and the UK. There's actually a collector, if you want to go to radiatoremblems.com, probably the best international collection in the world by a friend of mine, Klaus Wolf in Berlin. Might be volume 5 of automotive jewelry, who knows? But go there, you'll see all the different foreign marques there are. So if you think there's 5,000 marques in the US, Europe went through the same transformation as the American car industry, going from horse and bicycles to power-driven vehicles. So it's a fabulous story. But again, I don't have that much time. I work full-time, raised 4 sons. So I only had so much time, so I kept it narrow.
Have I missed anyone? Okay.
Oh, good.
Kurt, I have a question.
Yeah.
At the very, very top, there's a badge from Lexington. Can you talk about that?
Lexington. I know someone that lived in Lexington. Yeah, named probably after, I can't remember what this is. This was not a Massachusetts car company like you're thinking. I think it was Illinois or Indiana. I think it was Indiana company. Made cars in the 1920s, very highly respected, mid-priced cars. How they got their name? Probably something related to something patriotic, like the first battle of the Revolutionary War.
Oh, one more.
I thought about this when you were talking about the Anderson. Did any chance Anderson, South Carolina, was named after the man who built the car?
I don't know. The cars were made in Rock Hill.
Yeah, it wasn't.
So I don't know.
I don't remember, but sorry about that. You've managed to stump us.
Here's what I think you need to do: buy the book, and then we'll see if there's that connection there, because it's in there. Each one of I profile 400 different marques in the book. I give a really short little history of each car company, just to kind of wet your whistle, to do some research, further research yourself. But 400 different marques profiled in the book, so I can't really dedicate multiple pages to each marque, although each one is worthy of it.
I have that note, and it's in my hotel room, and I've forgotten who it was. But we do have these, and we thank you all. We hope if someone's interested in a book, come up and get a flyer, and hopefully we'll sell 100 of them.
Well, we'll go sign up sheets, so appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you all.